Are you ready to uncover the hidden truths about what our ancient ancestors actually got up to all day? Forget everything you thought you knew about cavemen, because we're about to dive deep into the fascinating, complex, and utterly surprising daily lives of people living over 90% of human history. This isn't just about grunting and clubbing. It's about ingenuity, community, and an incredible connection to the natural world that most of us can barely imagine these days. So grab a cuppa, get comfy, and let's peel back the layers of time, shall we? Now, when most of us hear caveman, a pretty daft image pops into our heads, doesn't it? Probably some bloke with a massive club dragging a woman by her hair and looking a bit bewildered by it all. Honestly, it's a total load of old cobblers, the reality of our Paleolithic ancestors. That's the Stone Age lot, mind you, was far, far more intricate, more intelligent, and frankly, a lot more sophisticated than those daft cartoons make out. We're talking about people who were genuinely brilliant at survival, masters of their environment, and incredibly adaptable. So let's ditch the stereotypes and get a proper grip on what their lives were really like, shall we? This period, the Paleolithic, stretches back an eye-watering 2.6 million years, right up to about 12,000 years ago. Just let that sink in for a moment. We're talking about over 99% of human history. That's before anyone even dreamt of farming, before there were cities, before anyone figured out how to write things down. It was a time of immense change, believe it or not. We often think of these periods as static, but oh no, not a bit of it. There were massive leaps forward in technology, how they organized themselves socially, and even how they expressed themselves artistically. It wasn't just sticks and stones. It was a constantly evolving tapestry of human ingenuity. So you might be wondering, how on earth do we know all this stuff about people who lived so long ago without so much as a single tweet or a TikTok video to go on? Well, it's down to some absolutely cracking detective work by archaeologists, anthropologists, and all sorts of clever clogs. They pieced together the puzzle using a variety of incredible clues. Firstly, we've got archaeological sites. These are like ancient rubbish dumps and workshops preserved in all sorts of bits and bobs, stone tools. They use the remains of their campfires, what we call hearths, bits of old food, and every now and then, if we're really lucky, something more perishable, like fragments of textiles or wooden bits and bobs. Every single one of these finds tells a story, a tiny glimpse into their everyday lives. Imagine finding a flint blade, still sharp enough to cut, or a pile of ancient snail shells next to a fire pit. It's like a direct line to the past, isn't it? Then there's the art, which is truly mind-blowing. We're talking about the spectacular cave paintings. Places like Lascaux in France or Altamira in Spain, where they depicted animal symbols and even human figures with incredible skill. And it's not just cave art. There are also portable bits of art like carved figurines and pendants. These aren't just pretty pictures. They offer us a window into their symbolic world, their beliefs, and their creative minds. They tell us these people weren't just focused on survival. They had an inner life, a rich culture. And finally, we look to modern-day hunter-gatherer societies. Now, this bit's a bit tricky because you can't just go around saying, right, these folks in the Amazon are exactly like people from 20,000 years ago. That would be a bit simplistic, wouldn't it? But these studies do offer some brilliant insights into how people live without agriculture, how they interact with their environment, and the social structures that emerge. It's about drawing careful parallels, not direct copies, but it helps fill in some of the gaps in our understanding. Now, it's vital to understand that the Paleolithic wasn't just one big, homogeneous experience. It varied massively, like night and day, depending on where you were on the planet, what the climate was like, and even which specific bit of the Paleolithic you were in. Think about it, someone knocking about in Africa 2 million years ago like Homo habilis would have had a vastly different day-to-day life compared to the Cro-Magnon people painting those incredible caves in France just 20,000 years ago. It's like comparing someone living in the Sahara to someone living in the Arctic today. Completely different challenges, completely different ways of life. Climate, without a shadow of a doubt, was probably the biggest factor in all of this. During the Ice Ages, for instance, when vast swaths of northern Europe and Asia were under thick glaciers, survival was a totally different kettle of fish than in warmer periods or regions. If you were living near the coast or a big river, you'd probably be a dab hand at fishing, coming up with all sorts of clever technologies to snare fish. But if you were stuck in the middle of a dense forest or sprawling grasslands, your focus would be entirely different, hunting different animals and gathering entirely different types of plants. It really hammered home just how adaptable these early humans were, constantly shifting their strategies to meet the demands of their surroundings. Despite all these variations, there was one big thing that united all Paleolithic peoples right across the globe, their way of life as hunter-gatherers. This wasn't just a hobby. It was their entire existence. Every single day revolved around finding food, whether that was through hunting animals, anything from a tiny rabbit to a massive woolly mammoth, or by gathering wild plants. It was a constant, intricate dance, with nature understanding its rhythms, its bounty, and its dangers. And that, my friends, is where the real story begins. So let's finally step back in time and truly immerse ourselves in what filled the hours, the days, and the very seasons of our incredible Paleolithic ancestors. Get ready to see their world through their eyes, and you might just find that their daily grind wasn't so different from ours in its fundamental need for purpose, community, and provision, just with far fewer spreadsheets and a lot more saber-toothed tigers. So imagine you're in a Paleolithic band, perhaps somewhere in what would eventually become the rolling hills of Yorkshire or the rugged Scottish Highlands. Your day isn't starting with a blaring alarm clock, is it? Not a chance. Instead, your rhythms would be completely dictated by the sun. As dawn broke, painting the sky with those incredible colors, that's when your day truly began. No artificial lights, no strict schedules, just the natural ebb and flow of light and dark constantly adjusting with the changing seasons. It's a bit different from our 9 to 5, isn't it? The very first order of business, more often than not, would be to rekindle the fire. Now, this wasn't just for a quick cuppa, mind you. Fire was absolutely central to their existence. It provided warmth, especially on those nippy mornings, light to see what you were doing, crucial protection from any hungry predators lurking about. And of course, it was essential for cooking. Archaeological digs like the fascinating one at Terra Amata in France, which dates back an astonishing 380,000 years, show us carefully maintained hearths. This wasn't just a bonfire, it was a lifeline. You see, starting a fire from scratch, especially if it was a bit damp or windy, was a real faff, a proper challenge. So most groups would go to great lengths to keep embers going overnight, or use slow-burning materials to ensure they always had a spark. It was a fundamental piece of daily household management, the very heartbeat of their living space. Once the fire was properly stoked, and crackling mornings were typically given over to those essential tasks that really needed daylight. Imagine the scene: the whole band, perhaps 20 to 30 individuals, would be assessing their immediate needs. It was a bit like a daily family meeting, but with much higher stakes. Was the food supply looking a bit thin? Did their trusty tools need a bit of TLC, maybe a fresh sharpening or a complete replacement? Were there any telltale signs of game nearby perhaps fresh tracks or disturbed foliage. Every single person would be tuned into these questions, their senses sharp, constantly observing and evaluating their surroundings. And let's not forget water, absolutely vital for survival. Water collection was a non-negotiable daily chore. They'd typically head to nearby streams or springs, carrying their precious supply back to camp in whatever containers they had cobbled together. Early on, these might have been simple things like animal bladders or gourds. Later, as their ingenuity grew, they'd craft woven baskets or even, eventually, early forms of pottery. Think about that for a second. Lugging water day in, day out, often over rough terrain. It really puts our modern taps and ready supply into perspective, doesn't it? Now don't go thinking they had some rigid timetable, like we do with our diaries and calendars. Paleolithic life was much more fluid, following a brilliant rhythm of what we call immediate return activities. That's things you do that give you an instant payoff, like gathering some berries for breakfast, and delayed return planning. That second one is fascinating. It means they were constantly thinking ahead, preparing for future challenges. Evidence from places like Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel, dating back nearly 800,000 years, shows they had an absolutely astonishing understanding of seasonal plant cycles. This wasn't just potluck. It was sophisticated long-term planning, anticipating what would be available and when. It's a testament to their incredible foresight and deep ecological knowledge. As the day truly got underway, the main activities shifted, always dictated by the season and the most pressing needs. But one thing was pretty constant: food acquisition dominated everything. It was the ultimate priority. Generally speaking, the adult males would often focus on hunting, especially bigger game, while the women typically concentrated on gathering plant foods and perhaps hunting smaller animals. Now, before anyone starts shouting about rigid gender roles, hold your horses. The archaeological evidence is actually pretty clear. There was a good deal of flexibility in these roles. It wasn't a hard and fast rule. Everyone pulled their weight and contributed in ways that made sense for the group and the situation. Some women might have been cracking hunters, and some men might have been excellent foragers. It was all about what worked best for survival. Midday might have been a time for food preparation, butchering that fresh kill or grinding those hard seeds, or maybe some serious tool maintenance. If it was a scorcher of a day, a bit of rest would have been in order too. Then, as the afternoon wore on and daylight started to fade, the hunters would hopefully return laden with game if they'd had a successful day, and the gatherers would come back with their baskets full of edible plants. The return of the day's provisions was a momentous occasion, wasn't it? As dusk began to settle, the whole community would gather once more around the central fire. This wasn't just about scoffing down dinner. This evening time was absolutely crucial for social bonding. Imagine the stories being told, the plans being made for the next day's hunt, the lessons being passed down to the younger generation. It was the original around the campfire moment where culture was forged, knowledge was shared, and the bonds of family and community were strengthened. Right, let's talk about getting dinner. Shall we? Obtaining food was without a doubt the primary occupation for Paleolithic peoples. It wasn't just about foraging. Hunting large animals was a serious business, demanding incredible skill, immense courage, and often really clever coordination. Early on, our human ancestors probably started out as opportunistic scavengers, picking over what other predators had left behind. But by about 500,000 years ago, at sites like Boxgrove in England, we've got cracking evidence of organized hunting. Imagine that at Boxgrove, archaeologists unearthed a horse shoulder blade with a clear spear wound, absolute proof that these folks weren't just waiting for leftovers. They were actively hunting. Back in the early Paleolithic, hunters were using fairly simple tools. Your basic hand axes and stout wooden spears. But they quickly got clever. By 400,000 years ago at a site called Schöningen, in Germany, we see humans crafting incredibly sophisticated wooden spears, perfectly balanced for throwing. These weren't just sharpened sticks, they were engineered weapons. Then, a huge leap forward came around 30,000 years ago with the introduction of spear throwers or atlatls. These ingenious devices dramatically increased the range and power of a thrown spear. It was a game changer, allowing hunters to take down bigger, more dangerous game from a safer distance. And if that wasn't enough, in some regions, the bow and arrow turned up by about 20,000 years ago, further revolutionizing hunting techniques. It shows you just how rapidly their technology evolved in response to their needs. Now, while hunting was undeniably glamorous and provided big protein boosts, it wasn't always a guaranteed success. Was it? You could go days without a kill. That's why plant gathering was often the much more reliable and consistent food source. These early humans were absolute masters of botany without even knowing the word for it. Archaeological evidence, including careful analysis of dental calculus. That's the plaque on ancient teeth. Believe it or not, shows that Paleolithic people munched on a huge variety of plant foods. We're talking about tubers, like early potatoes or yams, all sorts of fruits, nuts, seeds, and leafy greens. They weren't fussy. If it was edible, they'd figure out how to prepare it. And what's more, those dental studies have even found traces of numerous medicinal plants, suggesting they had a pretty advanced understanding of natural remedies. Imagine a Paleolithic apothecary knowing exactly which root to chew for a tummy ache. Gathering, though it might sound simple, actually required incredibly extensive knowledge. You needed to know precisely when different plants ripened, where they grew best, and crucially, how to process them to make them edible and safe. Some plants are poisonous raw, but fine when cooked. This vast, intricate knowledge wasn't written down, of course. It was passed down through generations, by word of mouth, by demonstration, creating an incredibly sophisticated ecological understanding. It was living knowledge, constantly refined, adapting to the local landscape. And it wasn't just plants. The water offered its own bounty. The Paleolithic site at Costa in Illinois, for example, dating back about 9,000 years, shows clear evidence of fishing using nets and hooks, cleverly crafted from bone. So whether it was casting a line or laying a snare, they were tapping into every available food source. Just like today, but arguably even more intensely, the Paleolithic larder was utterly dictated by the seasons. They were living entirely off the land, so they had to be in tune with nature's calendar, adapting their food acquisition rhythms to whatever was available. Spring, for instance, would have been a prime time for gathering fresh eggs and those first tender green shoots after the long winter. Imagine the joy of that first flush of new life summer, with its longer, warmer days, would bring a bounty of berries, and crucially a focus on hunting young animals. These juveniles might be less wary and easier to catch than their fully grown counterparts. Then, as autumn rolled around, the focus would shift to harvesting nuts and making serious preparations for the colder, leaner months ahead. Winter, as you can imagine, was the real test. Survival often relied much more heavily on any stored foods, and if they were lucky, successful winter hunting. Now, their food storage technologies were pretty limited compared to our modern fridges and freezers, but they were absolutely crucial for getting through the tough times. Some clever groups would dry meat, creating an early form of jerky. Proper ancient biltong, you might say. They also used underground storage pits to keep certain foods cool and preserved. And in those absolutely freezing regions, well, nature did the work for them. Freezing provided natural preservation for their provisions. What's truly fascinating is that the Paleolithic diet was remarkably diverse, far more so than the diets that came with early agriculture. We often think of agricultural societies as a step up, but early farmers often relied on just a few staple crops, leading to narrower diets. Analysis of bones from Paleolithic humans actually shows generally good nutrition, with fewer deficiencies than their agricultural descendants. It seems they had a well-balanced, wholesome diet from nature's buffet. Now, let's talk about one of the most utterly transformative innovations of the Paleolithic era: cooking. It's a bit debated exactly when our ancestors truly mastered fire for cooking, but we've got solid evidence dating back at least 400,000 years, with some tantalizing hints that it might even go back much, much further. This wasn't just about making food taste nicer, though I'm sure it helped. Cooking made a massive difference to their survival. Think about it. Cooking made many foods far more digestible, meaning they could extract more calories and nutrients from what they ate. And crucially, it could neutralize natural toxins in some plants, opening up a whole new world of edible resources that might otherwise have been dangerous or inedible raw. Cooking also meant less time spent chewing and digesting, freeing up valuable time for other activities. It's fair to say that mastering fire and cooking was a pivotal moment in human evolution, literally fueling our bigger brains and allowing us to thrive. If there's one thing Paleolithic humans spent a serious amount of time doing, it was manufacturing and maintaining their tools. This wasn't just an occasional chore, it was a constant, ongoing process. Stone tools, their primary cutting and scraping implements, were dull with use just like a modern kitchen knife, and they required regular resharpening or even complete replacement. A skilled napper, that's what we call someone who expertly crafts stone tools, could whip up a functional cutting edge in mere minutes, but more complex tools, those would demand hours of careful, precise work. It really puts those simple stone tools into perspective, doesn't it? The evolution of stone tool technology is a brilliant story in itself, showing an ever-increasing sophistication. The very earliest tools, dating back millions of years, were pretty basic. Just stone cobbles with a few flakes knocked off to create a crude cutting edge. But fast forward to about 76 million years ago and you see the Acheulean hand axes. These are proper works of art, carefully flaked on both sides. That's bifacial flaking and beautifully symmetrical. Then, the Middle Paleolithic brought in the Levallois technique, a revolutionary method that allowed even greater control over the size and shape of the stone flakes they were producing. But the real explosion of specialization came in the Upper Paleolithic, starting around 50,000 to 40,000 years ago. This period saw a massive proliferation of highly specialized tools: burins for engraving, scrapers for preparing animal hides. Think about making proper leather awls for puncturing, and incredibly effective projectile points for hunting. These weren't just made by trial and error. They reflected a truly sophisticated understanding of stone mechanics and how to get the most out of each piece for its intended function. It was proper Stone Age engineering. While stone tools get all the headlines because they preserve so well, wood was undoubtedly the most common material used by Paleolithic peoples. It's just a crying shame it rarely survives in the archaeological record because it rots away. But when it does, it's truly remarkable. Take, for example, the wooden spears found at Schoningen, or even a yew wood spear tip unearthed at Clacton-on-Sea, right here in England. These aren't just crude sticks. They show careful shaping with the natural properties of the wood, cleverly factored into the design. Imagine the skill and knowledge needed to select the right type of wood, season it, and then shape it. For balance and effectiveness, as the Upper Paleolithic progressed, materials like bone antler from deer, for instance, and ivory became increasingly important. These versatile materials could be carved into all sorts of useful items: fish hooks, fine needles for sewing, barbed harpoons for fishing, and even intricate decorative items. Antler in particular was highly prized for its brilliant combination of strength and flexibility, perfect for tools that needed a bit of give without breaking. Then there were the food processing tools. They had grinding stones for cracking nuts and processing seeds into flour-like substances, pounding tools for those really tough plant foods, and specialized cutting implements for butchering their kills. Experiments by archaeologists have shown that these seemingly simple stone tools were incredibly efficient. They could butcher even massive animals like elephants, though as you can imagine, it was a pretty time-consuming process. Beyond weapons and food prep containers were absolutely essential technology. You need something to carry your water, your gathered plants, or even your tools. Don't you? Early humans probably relied on natural containers. First, things like hollowed-out gourds, sturdy shells, or cleverly used animal bladders. But by the Upper Paleolithic, we see archaeological evidence suggesting they were using woven baskets and carefully sewn hide bags. And in a truly groundbreaking development, the earliest pottery actually appears around 20,000 years ago in China. Imagine the possibilities that opened up for cooking and storage clothing technology to evolve directly with the climatic challenges they faced. During those bitterly cold periods, proper hide preparation was an absolute must. They'd use stone scrapers to meticulously remove fat and tissue from animal hides, turning them into pliable materials. And then, thanks to those ingenious bone needles and slender awls, they could sew these hides together to create warm, protective clothing. This wasn't just about modesty. It was about pure survival in unforgiving environments. Now let's smash another persistent myth, shall we? Despite what all those cartoons and dodgy films would have you believe, our Paleolithic ancestors didn't only live in caves. That caveman stereotype is a bit of a misnomer, really. Caves were certainly one option, and a rather good one when available, especially in regions with truly foul weather, or where there were big, dangerous predators lurking about. Famous cave sites like Lascaux or Altamira, with their breathtaking art, show clear evidence of extensive human occupation. They were fantastic natural shelters, offering protection from the elements and a ready-made roof over their heads. However, caves suitable for proper habitation weren't exactly abundant. You couldn't just rock up and find a 5-bedroom cave with ensuite, could you? And evidence suggests that even when they did use caves, they were often used seasonally rather than year-round. They were a handy bolt hole, a temporary camp perhaps, but not always the permanent family residence. The archaeological record, with its incredible detective work, actually reveals a fascinating variety of constructed shelters, showing just how clever and resourceful these people were. At Terra Amata in France, for instance, archaeologists have unearthed traces of oval huts, roughly 8 to 15 meters long, supported by sturdy wooden posts. Imagine the effort that went into building those. And then, at Mezherik in Ukraine, dating back around 15,000 years, they used mammoth bones, yes, mammoth bones, arranged in circular patterns to create dwelling foundations, which were likely then covered with hides to form a cozy, surprisingly robust dwelling. Talk about making the most of your resources inside these shelters. Whether it was a cave or a constructed hut, space was remarkably organized for different activities, just like our homes today. The hearth, that all-important fire, typically formed the central focus. Around it, you'd find evidence of sleeping, areas, dedicated spaces for tool-making, and zones for processing food. It wasn't just a jumble, there was a definite logic to their living arrangements. And just like our homes, these ancient abodes required constant upkeep. The fire needed constant attention, as we've discussed. Shelters required regular repair after bad weather or general wear and tear, and living areas needed periodic cleaning. At some sites, archaeologists have even pinpointed distinct dumping areas where refuse was carefully deposited away from the main living spaces. So they weren't just chucking their rubbish anywhere. They had a sense of order and cleanliness, which probably helped with hygiene and keeping pests at bay. Child rearing in the Paleolithic era was an entirely integrated part of daily life. Unlike our modern society, where kids are often segregated by age and spend most of their time in schools or nurseries, Paleolithic children would have been observing and participating in adult activities from a very early age. They'd be watching their parents and other adults hunt, gather, make tools, and prepare food, learning by doing, absorbing vital skills and knowledge through direct experience. It was a proper apprenticeship from day one, preparing them for the realities of their world. Personal hygiene is a bit trickier to trace archaeologically. Ancient toothbrushes don't often survive, but ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherers offer some brilliant insights suggesting regular practices. They likely cleaned their teeth with fibrous plants. Imagine chewing on a twig to keep your pearly whites clean, and of course, bathed regularly in available water sources like streams or rivers. So no stinky cavemen here, or at least not all the time. Home life also encompassed the care of the ill or injured, which speaks volumes about their communal spirit. We have found several Paleolithic skeletons that show clear evidence of healed serious injuries or even long-term disabilities. This isn't just a medical curiosity. It indicates that these individuals, who wouldn't have been able to contribute fully to hunting or gathering, were supported by their community. Imagine breaking a leg or having a debilitating illness. In the Stone Age, you'd be utterly reliant on your band. This level of care and altruism paints a picture of incredibly strong social bonds and a deep sense of responsibility towards one another. It challenges that simplistic view of survival of the fittest as a brutal, uncaring struggle. Contrary to those rather primitive portrayals, we often see Paleolithic social life was anything but basic. It was rich, intricate, and deeply complex. The fundamental social unit was the band, typically a group of around 20 to 30 individuals, usually consisting of several related families. Think of it as an extended family group constantly moving and living together. But these bands weren't isolated islands cut off from the rest of humanity. Absolutely not. Archaeological evidence clearly demonstrates regular interaction between different groups. How do we know this? Well, we find exotic materials, like a certain type of stone or shell, far, far from their natural sources. This indicates that there were sophisticated trade networks spanning hundreds, even thousands of miles. Imagine goods traveling across vast, untamed landscapes, passed from one band to another, creating connections and alliances. Social bonds within and between these groups were meticulously maintained through a whole raft of activities. Sharing food, for instance, was absolutely fundamental. It wasn't just about being generous. It created reciprocal obligations, building trust and interdependence within the community. If you shared your kill today, you knew that someone else would share theirs with you tomorrow if your hunt was unsuccessful. This created a robust safety net. Evidence from sites like Dolní Věstonice, dating back 29,000 years, shows massive hearths capable of cooking enough food for substantial gatherings. This strongly suggests communal feasting events, big get-togethers, where everyone came together, celebrating, cementing bonds, and reinforcing their collective identity. Imagine the atmosphere at one of those, and then there's the art. Oh, the art, it played such a crucial role in Paleolithic social and spiritual life. The very earliest definitively human art includes the processing of ochre, a natural pigment, at Blombos Cave in South Africa, almost 100,000 years ago. This wasn't just for painting. It had symbolic and perhaps even ritualistic uses. But by the Upper Paleolithic, we see that absolutely spectacular burst of creativity, those famous cave paintings, incredible portable figurines like the Venus of Willendorf, and even musical instruments. Music, being rather ephemeral, doesn't often leave physical traces, but the surviving instruments offer tantalizing glimpses into their sonic world. We've found bone flutes dating back as far as 43,000 years ago in Germany. Careful reconstruction of these instruments has shown that they could produce notes in recognizable scales. Pair that with drums made from stretched hides or hollowed logs, though these rarely preserve, and you've got evidence of incredibly sophisticated musical traditions. Imagine the sounds echoing through the valleys, accompanying storytelling or rituals. Evidence for early medicine and healing practices is equally fascinating. We find plant residues with known medicinal properties in dental calculus from ancient teeth, suggesting they used natural remedies for ailments. And some scholars believe that certain shamanic practices may be reflected in the therianthropic images found in cave art, those incredible human-animal hybrid figures. These could possibly depict transformed states of consciousness, perhaps part of rituals or spiritual journeys. Now, it's not to say that Paleolithic life was all sunshine and daisies. Conflict certainly existed, but it wasn't a constant state of brutal warfare. While some Paleolithic skeletons do show injuries related to violence, they are relatively rare compared to later periods in human history. Why might that be? Well, it's thought that resource abundance relative to population size likely reduced the intensity of competition in many regions. When there's enough to go round, there's less reason for all-out war. Isn't there the Paleolithic lifestyle? Despite its challenges, represents the longest and arguably most successful human adaptation in our entire history. It sustained our species through dramatic climate changes, from ice ages to warmer interglacial periods, and it enabled us to colonize virtually every corner of the globe. Just think about that resilience. So what can we in our modern, often disconnected world actually learn from this incredibly enduring way of life? Quite a lot, actually. So we've covered quite a bit, haven't we? From the crack of dawn to the flickering firelight of evening, from hunting mammoth to crafting tools, from raising bands to creating breathtaking art. The daily grind of our Paleolithic ancestors was anything but simple or primitive. It was a complex, demanding, yet often highly rewarding existence, brimming with ingenuity and resilience. Perhaps most significantly, the Paleolithic period wasn't just some rough and ready prelude to what we call civilization. No, not a bit of it. It was in itself a highly successful and remarkably sustainable adaptation. Think about that for a moment. For over 99% of human history, this lifestyle maintained a pretty stable balance between human populations and the available resources. They weren't depleting the planet. They were living within its means in intimate harmony with nature. They developed incredibly rich cultural traditions, sophisticated social structures, and an unparalleled understanding of their environment. These achievements are absolutely worth considering, especially as we grapple with our own rather sticky environmental challenges and the sheer pace of modern life. When we peel back the layers and look at the archaeological record with fresh, informed eyes, what we truly see are not some primitive, brutish ancestors. Not at all. We see incredibly innovative, intelligent, and highly social humans facing monumental environmental challenges with truly astonishing creativity and remarkable resilience. Their solutions, from unbelievably sophisticated hunting technologies to profoundly moving symbolic art, were the bedrock, the very foundations for all subsequent human achievements. Every single thing we have today, from the smallest gadget to the grandest city, owes something to the sheer ingenuity forged in the Paleolithic. So the next time you find yourself picturing a caveman, I genuinely hope you'll cast aside that tired old stereotype. Instead, imagine a skilled technologist, a deeply knowledgeable botanist, an innovative artist, a compassionate caregiver, and a highly cooperative community member, all rolled into one remarkably adaptable, intelligent, and utterly human individual. That, my friends, is the true legacy of the Paleolithic. And it's a legacy we can all be rather proud of, isn't it?